So there are two twin women named Lori and Reba Chappell. And now one of them, Lori, is kind of more shy, not as outgoing, a little more reserved, and she also happened to record an award-winning album of country music. The other one is outgoing, loves to be social, have fun, go out, and she works in a hospital as a nurse. But there's two interesting things about these sisters. The first is that they happen to share a blood supply and a skull. That's right, they're actually conjoined twins who have lived their entire lives this way, basically connected in kind of the front side of the head. And the second part that you might say is even more interesting is they're incredibly joyful, optimistic, and happy. And not only do they say they're happy, but they actually embody it. And when researchers asked them if they'd ever consider a surgical separation, they were just like, they couldn't even believe the question. They were like, no, there's not a chance. Why, for all the money in the world, why would we do that? You'd be ruining two lives in the process. Now, if you're anything like me, when you hear that story, you're kind of like, holy shit, how can they be happy in that situation? And it speaks to this idea that we often tend to assume happiness has to be a certain way or it occurs in a certain way. Because maybe you even think, these girls are just delusional and they're kind of crazy and they're just convinced themselves they're happy. But if they consistently demonstrate positive affect or positive emotion, optimism, and they embody what they say, well, then you have no other thing you can say besides they must, on some level, be genuinely happy. So oftentimes we don't really understand what will or won't make us happy. In fact, we're pretty terrible at predicting it and understanding it. And that is part of what this video is about. So in this video, we're going to explore the surprising science between happiness and success. What is the connection? What is the relationship there? And I'll start by saying we tend to think, I believe, that it tends to be success, then happiness, right? It's sort of like, I'm going to go out, go to school, get a great GPA, get a really good job, get promoted, eventually find a husband, a wife, a partner, or whatever, settle down, have this really great life, and then at some point, I'm basically declared successful. I don't know if that's a form you fill out with the IRS or something where they say check it off and it's like you're good, but that's what we tend to think. But it turns out this may not be so accurate. And it's not to say that achievement or goal setting, goal pursuit, and goal accomplishment are not valid parts of happiness. In fact, when you look at most psychological constructs of happiness, what you see is that achievement is an important part. You can think about the work of Dr. Marty Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. So he shares a model called PERMA, which stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. So achievement, that last part, is an important part of it. But suffice to say that often just getting this success doesn't lead to happiness, and there are plenty of examples of that, big and small. Think about someone like Robin Williams. You know, this is a guy who said he dreamed at a young age. He said, I'm going to have a TV show. And then what happened? Well, he got it. And he said, I'm not just going to have a TV show. I'm going to have the greatest TV show. I'm going to be number one in the country. And then what happened? Well, he's number one not in the country, but in several countries across the world. And then he said, that's not enough either. I'm going to win an award, not just for comedy, but for being an amazing actor in drama. He won that award. And then, of course, what happened? So you see, it's not just this idea that we get some sort of success and then we get happiness. In fact, I'm going to share with you some of the research that suggests it may just be the reverse, that it's actually happiness that sets us up for success. So we'll start with this really interesting meta-study. It's called The Benefits of Frequent Positive Affect. Does Happiness Lead to Success? By Diener, King, and Lyubomirsky. Now, a meta-study is essentially a study of studies. So if you have one study, they do an experiment or then observation, or they do some research into something. A meta-study takes a bunch of those and sort of looks at them as a whole and says, what is the common pattern? So in this case, they looked at, I think it was around 200 studies that had a total of about 275,000 participants. And they started to see, well, what is the relationship here between happiness and then kind of these other specific life outcomes or various measures of success? And so when they were thinking about happiness, they talk about that as essentially positive affect, which is kind of an abundance of various positive emotions, not just happiness in the sense of like, oh, I'm so happy and excited. It could be joy, it could be peace, it could be relaxation, it could be meaning, anything that kind of makes you feel good. And here's what they found. That people who had higher levels of happiness, or happiness levels in general, positive emotion, tended to predict success in the following areas: marriage, friendship, income, job performance, and health. And what's important to point out is they said that they found that happiness and positive emotion often precedes these outcomes. And I'll read a quote from their abstract. It could be, where is it? Oh, the cause of the desirable characteristics and resources and successes correlated with happiness. So positive affect, essentially this baseline well-being, is actually the cause of many of the desirable characteristics and resources and successes that then we say bring us happiness. So it's almost a cycle that begins with a foundation of well-being and positive emotion. And then what happens? Well, you get better outcomes in your work, in your earnings and income. That was an interesting one. Your health and your relationships. And then those later, again, are associated with even more happiness. So it really is, according to this very comprehensive study, with again, almost 300,000 people, hundreds of studies, it really seems to suggest that does happiness lead to success? Well, the answer is yes. Happiness sets the foundation for success. Positive emotion and well-being are essential. And this idea was somewhat popularized. If you look at great reference is Sean Akers' book, The Happiness Advantage, where he talks about a lot of this research and pulls it into one book and explains that happier people tend to be more creative, more engaged, and more effective, and thus they get more success. You think about the same thing in relationships. What's the type of person you want to be around? You want to be around this Debbie Downer, kind of Eeyore type, very grumpy, or all else considered, attractiveness levels, earnings, whatever. Would you rather have that or someone who's pretty upbeat, positive, makes you feel good? So in both work or professional and life outcomes, we tend to see happiness setting a foundation for success. But there's 3 more specific studies where this continues to get more and more interesting that I want to share with you. And so we'll talk about one that relates to performance and also courage, or actually being a hero. It's kind of interesting. We'll talk about one that relates to health, and then we'll talk about one that even relates to how you interact with the world kind of physiologically in terms of your perception. So let's dive into this next one. This study is titled Happy Soldiers Are Highest Performers. It comes from Lester Stewart, V, Bonnet, Diener, and Seligman. And what they did here is they looked at 908,096 soldiers in the U.S. Army. And what they found is that higher levels of what we could call happiness, they looked at it in terms of positive affect, which is a tendency towards positive emotion. Low negative affect, so you don't spend a lot of time being negative or feeling down. And optimism, which is sort of like happiness but oriented toward the future, saying, I see myself having good life outcomes. Those soldiers were more likely to win awards for both performance and courage and heroism. That's right. So you could get this sample. You could get a baseline assessment and predict, based on how happy someone is now, in the next 4 years, how likely are they to win a service award. Again, that award could be specifically for courage or being a hero, or just performance. And what they find is the strength of this is the soldiers within that kind of the highest group versus the lowest group of happiness and well-being. The highest group was 4 times more likely to win one of those awards. So again, we see a huge sample here, and it's not just in like traditional business roles, this is a military context, that these people that have higher baseline levels of positive emotion and happiness tend to be more successful and even show more bravery in service. Let's look at another study. This one is titled Emotional Style and Susceptibility to the Common Cold. You begin with 334 volunteers. And sidebar, I don't know how the hell they got 334 people to do this, because what they did was essentially call them up and say, hey, would you like to participate in an experiment? They say, maybe, I guess so, yeah. Say, all right, all you got to do is come down to the laboratory, and we're going to expose you to a cold virus and see how sick you get. And it's like, what the hell were you? You're like, oh yeah, I don't really have anything better going on this weekend. I guess I'll do that. But anyway, they got like 334 people to do this. 2 weeks leading up to the exposure, they tracked their emotional tendencies, for lack of a better word. And they used the acronym PES or NES, which is positive emotional style or negative emotional style. So it's sort of like your baseline emotional tendencies and state. So they tracked that for 2 weeks, they exposed you to the virus, and then afterwards they follow up to see how sick you get and what your symptoms are like. What they found is that people with a positive emotional style were more resistant, they had a higher, more effective, I should say, immune system response, and they showed fewer symptoms than the negative emotional style group. So what's that saying is that happiness has a pretty direct line to your immune function and your overall health in how you defend yourself and actually respond to viruses or sickness. It's a pretty amazing study. And then a final one. Let's talk about this. Pull up the title. And this one is called Positive Emotions Broaden the Scope of Attention and Thought Action Repertoires. Now, the last one was Emotional Style and Susceptibility to the Common Cold by Cohen, Doyle, Turner, Alper, and Schoner. I'll include references for all of the literature here in the comments. This one, Positive Emotions Broaden the Scope of Attention and Thought Action Repertoires by Fredrickson and Brannigan. So in this study, what they do, it begins with something called priming, which is that you can essentially manipulate someone emotionally to induce a different state. So in this example, it might be, hey, we're going to flash images up almost subconsciously of like a smiling baby or a funny image or someone else smiling, and it sort of gets you into a more positive emotional state. You can do the same thing with negative priming, where you show you images of maybe something sad or upsetting or angry or disturbing, and it sort of primes you to a negative emotional state, right? So you're getting 2 people in state as part of the experiment. And then they do first a visual test where they're basically flashing these images on the screen and seeing how good you are at perceiving the details on the outer edges of the images. That's one experiment. And then the second experience they did was they basically had you do this statement of like, I would like to, and they gave you like 20 blank lines. And you could just fill out whatever you wanted in there. And so it's meant to test almost like your creativity or your, again, they use the term thought action repertoires, your ability to respond to a situation at any given moment. Maybe they say something like, oh, you're upset or you feel good or you feel whatever. How can you respond? I would like to. And so you could imagine someone saying, oh, I just want to sit here and be upset, or I just want to, I don't know, I just want to cry, or I just want to watch TV. Versus maybe someone who's more, I'd be like, oh, I want to go do something. I want to go accomplish a task. I want to call a friend. I want to go for a drive. I want to listen to music. It was sort of an interesting way to test, again, this expansiveness of your repertoire of behaviors in that moment. Oh, what do you think they found? So first of all, people who are primed with positive emotion had a broader, more expansive visual field. So you could literally see more. Then the second piece, of course, people who are primed with positive emotion had a more expansive repertoire of actions and behaviors. So they could basically see more possibility in any given moment. So I share those three specifically because I think they're almost a step beyond the baseline connection of happiness leads to success. In each of these, you get some really specific outcomes that are kind of incredible, that they're strongly associated with happiness or well-being, positive emotion, whatever term you want to use. But that's really the thing that I hope is highlighted in this video, is that both when you look at these individual studies, but also this meta-study, which is a study of studies, the scientific literature is really giving some clear direction that it's actually our well-being, our happiness, that sets the foundation for success in a variety of life outcomes, whether it be marriage and friendship, your relationships, your income and professional success, and even your physical health and vitality, all depend upon happiness. And maybe the most important part that I don't have time to get into in depth in this video, but of course, what my channel's all about is that, of course, happiness is learned. Happiness depends upon certain skill sets and certain dimensions, certain causes and conditions. So if you build the skill sets and you cultivate those causes and conditions, then wherever your baseline happiness level is, you can bring that up. And that's what I offer on this channel, is a lot of tools and practical insights to help you do that. But for now, I'm going to pause here and remember that happiness is the foundation for success. Again, you see references to all the literature and stuff in the comments here. And I'll see you in the next video. So this has been Jackson Kirchis with the Happiness PhD. I'll see you next time.